All right, hey everyone, привет. My name is Andrzej Krzywda. I came to you from Poland, and it's great to be here. It's my first time in Kiev. I'm a Ruby programmer since 2004, so I'm probably an old-timer here. I started my company called Arkency in 2007, so that's 11 years of running a company. I'm a half-time programmer, half-time CEO of the company. I'm also a chess player. So my first thing I did in Kiev, I went to the Shevchenko Park yesterday. And there was this guy sitting in front of a board without the opponent. And he was looking at me from the distance. And he was like, come on here. I was like, OK. And he said, oh, but we play for money. And I said, OK. And he said, it's 20 hryvnia. I was like, OK. We both put the 20 hryvnia on the board, and we started playing 5 minutes each. So that's a blitz game. And after 20 minutes, I earned 40 hryvnia. So that's my. So it's going very well in Kiev, Ukraine. I really like this place so far. So. All right, to the topic. So I want to talk to you about a certain journey I made through the years when I started Ruby in 2004, and now it's 2018, which according to the math is 14 years, which is quite a lot. So the journey I've had was as a programmer, as someone who was also observing the community, and because I started Arkency as a company which specializes mostly in the bigger Rails projects, so we often join existing Rails projects, and I often review code from other people, from existing Rails projects, especially the bigger ones, like more than 100 Rails active record models. So if you work on a big Rails application right now, which is like 3 or 4 years old, there is some chance that I have seen your code. That's a warning. But I will not show your code. But what I was doing, I was trying to detect certain patterns which were happening in the Rails projects. And I want to show you what are the different phases of our Rails applications as I see that, and also the different phases of the Rails application as we do at Arkency with some kind of specific way. So it'll be like a journey over time, but not only over time, but because certain phases are still visible in the Rails community today, and that's great because all the techniques and all the phases I'm showing today they're okay. I'm not judging them. It's just different phases work well for different situations. But I want to start with a situation when 2004, DHH, we all know him, right? Who likes DHH? Who doesn't really like that much DHH? OK. So I'm also in both those groups because I think we owe DHH the situation that we are here, because the Ruby community wouldn't happen without DHH. On the other hand, there are certain, things about DHH. I sometimes disagree with certain details about his design decisions, but that's OK. The discussion is ongoing. But what I really respect in DHH was, in 2004, he created Ruby on Rails. In 2004, I was OK, that's a difficult thing to say in front of Ruby audience, but in 2004, I was a happy Java developer. Yeah. I was like 80% happy. And I didn't know that I wasn't 20% happy. But DHH came along and he said, with the Ruby on Rails, he created this framework. And you know what was difficult about the situation that he was in? If you create a Ruby framework today, you have a big audience. You can easily, well, maybe not easily, but you can find a ways to get your message through, to show you, this is my new Ruby framework, I can show it to you. Imagine DHH in 2004, there was no Ruby developers, unless you were in Japan. So that was a difficult task, and I think my respect is that he is a really good salesman overall. And he managed to sell the idea of Ruby on Rails to Java people like me and to PHP people, for example. And the funny thing was that he chose the different targets, so the Java people, and he, as a good salesman, he offered a different kind of offer to why they should switch to Ruby and Rails. So to Java people, he said, look, your code is nice, but it's a bit over-structured, it's a bit over-architectured. And that was true. And he also said, it takes 5 days to display hello world in a Java application in 2004, because you spent 5 days configuring XML files. It's not like that anymore, just to be clear, but that was the case in 2004, and that was like something that I have like, it's true. I've had this problem. Whenever I wanted to start a Java application in 2004, it was exactly 1 week to display the hello world. So that's the message he got me into Ruby. To PHP people, he got an opposite message. He said, again, that was 2004, your code is okay, but it's kind of similar to spaghetti. So you don't have structure, you lack the structure, you lack the conventions, and this is Rails, I give you the structure. So to Java people, he said there is too much structure. To PHP people, he said you don't have enough structure, I can give it to you. So the Ruby community at the beginning was mostly Java and PHP, and obviously some Microsoft people as well. But back in 2004, there was like no Ruby natives. There were no people who just started with Ruby with their careers. So it was an important part. And I started doing Rails, and I realized that there are certain problems. Like I was offered the 20% that I wasn't happy with Java, but no one told me that I will lack certain things which were among those 80% of things that I like about Java. For example, in Java, we've actually had good design patterns, and we've had some different good rules in the community about coupling and so on. So an active record was kind of like a regression to Java programmers. But I'm not blaming active record. This was by design. So this tweet was published by me like 2 years ago. And it wasn't only for fun. That was a fact that active record is like coupling several roles. But that's the reason we can start new Rails applications so quickly. So let's not blame that too much, that active record is like a super bad pattern. But if the applications grow bigger, then that is a problem. Magic, Rails magic. The first and early Rails way was all about putting all the stuff in the controllers. It's still happening sometimes. I still see code like that. So this is a piece of code of Ruby from RubyMine. Redmine. Redmine is a fantastic Rails project. It works, but the code base is mostly like that you have huge controllers. And even Redmine inspired me to write a book at some point, which is called Fearless Refactoring Rails Controllers, where I show how to refactor such controllers into something different. So that was the early Rails way. Then there is the Rails way, like something I think DHH would consider a good design. I will slightly disagree sometimes, but overall, the idea is to put everything into models, including certain gems, including, by the way, Axe as Hasselhoff, anyone knows? You should try it, it's great. Just run a new Rails application and add this gem and see what happens. And Rails is all about the concerns now, and DHH is promoting the idea of concerns. So that's the Rails way. That was kind of the result of the battle where we should put code. Controllers or models. That was like fat controllers versus fat models and so on. That was a big debate in the Rails community in 2008, I think. After that, there was another wave. I call it the next wave, but it's more about service objects. So certain people found that there are certain problems in the Rails project, that we miss one layer of code, and the layer was called like service objects. How many of you more or less use service objects now? Okay, probably majority. So that was something that was happening like 2009, 2010 chronologically in the Rails community. And it's funny because service object as a term doesn't really exist in other communities. Java people, they rarely use service object as a name. They use more like maybe application services or application layer. But this doesn't matter. We are really good at coming up with our own terms in the Rails community. The service object is mostly like a layer between controller and model, and you put a service object in between. So the controller calls the service object, and the service object calls the active record models, including some other maybe external libraries like sending emails or third-party API. Then there is like the next incarnation of the next way. You have service object, but you now have also the idea of repository. How many of you use some kind of repository pattern? Okay, not bad. So while the service objects, that was a solution to a problem in the Rails applications, that we don't really know what is the API of our Rails application. Without service objects, we don't know it. If you cover your application with the service objects, you at least know what are the entry points to your application. So that was a good thing. With repositories, we were kind of solving a similar problem, because in a bigger application, it's good to have application layer and domain layer. So application layer, we can call the service objects the application layer, and the domain is like active record and whatever is below, including the database, but that's a detail now. So what we are doing here is we are passing the repository as a dependency to the service object. And instead of calling Post.create directly, we go through repository. More or less, that's a simplification here. It results in a repository object having like over 40 methods, because there are like so many ways you can grab the data or you can change the data in your application, right? So it results in a big repository object. Anyone is there with big repository objects? Yeah, several, okay. So that was something that I have seen as a popular pattern among those big, really big Rails applications, because people were looking for structure, and I think it was still a good step forward, even though it resulted in certain smells like the big repository objects. So there was another approach, and I think some people got influenced by the domain-driven design movement. How many of you, like certain patterns about domain-driven design? Okay, a few people here. So there was this guy called Eric Evans. He wrote the classic blue book, Domain-driven design. It's a lot about different design patterns being put together so that your code resembles what is happening in the business. That's more or less the idea behind DDD. But there are also many like patterns like repositories and aggregates. Aggregates are those objects where you the like important objects in your application. And the DDD approach was that it's okay to use repositories, but I'm not sure what's happening. It's over. So the repository object was is responsible for loading the aggregate or the important object and saving, 2 methods, more or less. And also, usually at this moment, you come up with another idea, which is in the previous slide I showed you, the repository is returning the active record object. So we are still talking in terms of active record. So if it returns active record, you can still use active record in the view, which is very convenient. Active record is really nice for using in the views. You can use form 4, you can use link 2. There are certain things that are good with active record. In this approach, the post object now is your own object. So people are creating a post object. There are no definitions here, which has a change title method, and it doesn't inherit from active record base. It's like its own object. It's like plain old Ruby object. It's an idea that also came from Java at some point. They were about POJO, plain old Java object, and there is plain old Ruby object. Which means that now you have those domain objects under your control. They're no longer active record, which is, in a way, it's a good thing, but in a way, it's a bad thing. It's a bad thing because now you return the post at the end, and if you pass it to the view, you still need the post object to be compatible with active model, right? Otherwise, it will not be, it can't be used nicely. And that was a problem. Another problem was that the post object, even though it's like a domain object, a nice thing, it still has to expose all the public attributes. Again, the same as active record does all the time. And that's a bit of a problem in design patterns and object-oriented programming. You would say it's a bad pattern if the object kind of exposes everything about itself. It's not a good design overall. But how can you do it without, how can you display an object on the website without exposing attributes, right? No way. And that was a moment I came with my thinking to this point, and I was like, I like this code, but there are several things I don't like about this code. And I like kind of stagnated with my research. I was very disappointed where I got. Like, I still considered this previous code better than just active record for bigger Rails applications. But I wasn't proud of that. Like, people came to my project and they were saying, so now we are repeating all the boilerplate in the domain code because it's actually the same as active record, but you don't want to use active record, so now you're repeating the code. And they were right. But I couldn't find a solution for a long time. But I was trying to insist and finding something. There was a meetup in Wrocław. It was about software craftsmanship. Every month we were meeting, not a big group of people. We were meeting and we agreed to discuss a certain topic, and we agreed to read some papers about that topic before we joined the meetup. So it was a nice, like a discussion club. And one day there was a discussion, and the idea was to discuss event sourcing. And I didn't know anything about event sourcing. It was just a term that I've heard about. And we were talking about, I think it was 2012, so like 6 years ago. And event sourcing as an idea, I didn't get it really at the beginning. And when I read the paper by Martin Fowler, I still didn't get it. And when we all arrived to the meetup, which was in the bar, conveniently, we started discussing, and everyone was like, I don't get it. Like, do you get it? No, I don't get it, so let's have a beer. After 2 beers, we were close to getting it, but then we forgot. Then we had some vodka shots, and with like very relaxed atmosphere. And everyone was like, I don't get it. Why you should? The idea of event sourcing is you load the state from events one by one with all the changes, exactly as Git repository works. And then you see the state. And I was like trying to use the metaphor. Okay, so Git repository can be built from one commit and another, and then you see the last result. And I was like, I don't get it. How can I use it in a Rails application, for example, if for every request I need to load the data, right? Load the state, load the events for the whole system. Doesn't make sense. It's stupid. And then Mirek joins the meetup. Mirek was a C# developer. And he joined the meetup late, like 2 hours in, so we're like several beers later. And Mirek said, okay, you're talking about event sourcing, yeah? And we're like, I was like, no, not anymore. With it, as every programmer's discussion, we ended up with JavaScript, and we were discussing JavaScript. But he was like, let me try to help you. I will try to explain event sourcing to you. I was like, yeah, I'm not thinking you get a chance, but okay, let's go for that. And he said, okay, what's your main worry? And I said, my main worry, I don't want to load the whole state of events to the memory. It's not efficient. It's just wrong. And he said, you never do that. You never load all the events into memory, because the events are grouped into streams. And that was my first aha moment. Streams. I didn't get the idea, actually, but it sounded cool, right? And he explained to me, so you probably use some kind of aggregate or something like this. And I said, yeah, I call them entities, but it is like something like this, the active record object, for example. And he said a stream is just a collection of events which is happening to that specific object. So you group your application into streams per aggregate or per entity or per whatever object you call it. I was like, okay, I think now I understand. So you never load the all events, you just load, I don't know, 20 events. You build in memory, this is efficient, this is fast, that's good. So that was my first aha moment. And then, but then I told to Mirek, but what's the point? Like, what is actually the value from that? And he said, okay, so what are your other problems? He was a good salesman, actually. What are your other problems with your current approaches? And I was like, yeah, so I have this like aggregate, but then I want to display it. So I have all the public attributes exposed, and I don't like that. And he asked me, do you know what is CQRS? I said, no. By the way, anyone knows what is CQRS? Okay, not that many people, but still a few. It's an idea that when you read it as definition, it doesn't make much sense, similarly with event sourcing, at least to me. The idea is to split your application into reads and writes. And it's like, I don't get it. Like, I like my objects to be first, set some state, and then I can read my state. But Mirek said, but you don't like exposing all the attributes. And I said, yeah, true, I don't like that. But I asked, okay, I still can't imagine what it makes, how does it relate to events? And how can it help me in Rails application? And he said, in your Rails application, in your web application, you have several, in every page, you have several boxes of data, right? Yes, so, okay, so those boxes of data, let's call them read models. Okay, and each read model, how do you display this read model right now in your Rails application? I said, well, okay, usually it's, I take one aggregate and I show it, but very often it's like I need to load 4 different objects, join them somehow, and then expose the data on a website. So lots of joins, usually it's not very efficient and so on. And it's a problem because I use the same active record objects or the same aggregates for all the different views. And one view displays 1 column, other views display 10 columns. Some of them need to be filtered, some of them need to be sorted. So that's a complicated situation. It's like one model for everything, basically. And Mirek told me, so now be careful. You need one read model per one box of data on your website. Okay, interesting. How do they know what data they should show? That's the point with events. You publish an event when something is changing, like a title has been changed of a blog post, And this piece of code, a small unit, is subscribing. It's a basic pub-sub pattern, publish and subscribe. So you publish the event, and the read models, they subscribe to just certain other events. I will show a code in a moment. So then they are becoming like isolated units of code, isolated modules, easily unit tested, right? You can just input these events, output is some kind of data structure, active record, for example, that you display on the website. That's easy to test. So instead of one big model for all the views in your application, you now have several small modules. That was really cool when I heard about it. And that was the second aha moment for me. So usually I have those aha moments. I've had like maybe 10 aha moments in my career. I'm 20 years in IT, so I've had like 10 aha moments in my career. So it's like once every 2 years. So then that evening I've had 2 aha moments. I was like, okay, Mirek. And it wasn't by accident that we have hired Mirek like 1 month later. Even though he was a C# developer, he learned Ruby very quickly, but he had this all DDD knowledge and event sourcing knowledge and CQRS knowledge, and he helped us applying DDD and CQRS and event sourcing. So since then, since 6 years ago, we've been applying those patterns in many Rails applications, and they were working very well for us. We were repeating the code for the event idea that at some point we built this gem called Rails Event Store. And the first goal of this gem was to help with legacy Rails applications, because that was something we specialized in. We always took over existing code. We never do Rails new, basically. That was our problem. And so we wanted to build the Rails Event Store and make it possible to existing Rails projects that you can quickly plug it in and start publishing events. And maybe you create some small read models and start reacting to those events. And that's the best pattern to use this idea. Start publishing events and use read models, one box of data, try to encapsulate it with one database table, for example, and just react to it. That's a good starting point. So that was the first goal, and I think we have achieved that goal. Rails Event Store is, I don't know, 3 years old. I don't know exactly. Then I set another goal, and I said we want to be good for new Rails applications. So we want to be convenient that when you do Rails new, which we don't do very often, that you want to just plug in the Rails Event Store, and then it's a good moment that maybe you will go with event sourcing from the beginning. Maybe all your boxes of data will be read models. So you will have the good design, good objectively subjectively by us, in your application from the beginning. That's, by the way, very often a thing that people come to us, to Arkency, and they ask us, you guys seem to be good at designing big applications. I said, yeah, well, not good, but we can find our ways around. And they're like, we want to start a new project, but we want to start the project right from the beginning. Because it never happens, right? It's always we start with new dreams, new hopes, and then 2 months later it didn't work again. So we've set up with the new Rails applications, we've built certain features how to make it work for new Rails applications, and I think we also achieved that goal. I'm aware of many projects that are already using Rails Event Store from the beginning, and I'm involved in one project where it also happened there. There was a third goal, which I will reveal at the end. And now I can show you some. Oh, by the way, we are having a Rails Event Store conference because we have a small community but growing. It will happen in October. So here is how aggregate looks like. Aggregate, think of it as the post object in the blog application, typical blog application. So we have the include aggregate root. I'm not happy about that. That's something because I didn't want my domain classes to be infected with framework code. We will probably find some way of dealing without it, but for now it's there. And now you have a very simple design. There's nothing about database here. Include aggregate root, basically all it does is that we have now access to the event store. We can publish events. That's the only role. It knows about ID, and ID is the form of a string. And this string is a stream name. I told you about streams. So streams are the collection of events specific to this particular object. And we like to prefix them with post because just the UID wouldn't be enough to help us with debugging. And then you have actually publish method, publish as in publish the blog post. And you say apply post publish unless it was already published. So the rule of this aggregate is very simple. Don't publish the same blog twice. That's the easy stuff. Apply is a method from aggregate root, is basically publishing the event. Post publish is an event. It's a small data structure. It has just two fields, one field, post ID, that's all. And then this method, apply post published, That's the method used for event sourcing and aggregate. Because when you are using the post object again in your Rails application, you don't want to publish the same events again. You don't want to like the recurrency problem, right? So instead, we use this object for building the state. So when a post is even sourced again, it will just set the state. One event by one event, you will get to the point where the state is current. So how do you use it? You can use it in the read model. You use the events in the read model. That's a read model called post list on admin page. So a list of posts which is only displayed on the admin page, not the main blog applications, but in the admin panel. And that's an example of how you can be very specific, because on the admin page, you only show titles, you never show content, and you don't care about SEO, and you don't care about lots of other things. So you can have a very small and very specific read model, a very small, very specific unit. All it does, it reacts to an event, and for certain events, for post created, it uses active record. So that's something that we are used to, and that's the great part about read models, that they can use active record, which means they're nicely being displayed on the website, on the views. So update one. So this here post has just the title column and status column. So whenever you change anything in the application regarding that specific post, it will update the status probably, and it will get shown in the admin page. So for example, when you delete a post, in event sourcing, you never actually delete an object. You just say post was deleted. And it's up to the other places in the code that you say how they should interpret it. It's like the reverse of active record, where once you destroy the post, it's everywhere is destroyed, right? Including someone might be relying on that, but that's their problem. So here is a reverse situations. Now you have to go with every unit and think, how do I need to handle removing a post? How do I handle it in the admin page? So on the main page, when you show the list of blog posts, you are actually deleting it because you don't want this to be displayed. But in the admin page, you want to show it as deleted as a status. Process managers. 2 years ago, there was Robert Pankowecki from Arkency talking about sagas. Sagas and process managers, kind of the same thing. So I'm just showing one simple example. You can go back and the RubyC website from 2016. There is much more about sagas, because sagas are basically a unit of code which reacts to event. So event is an input, a collection of events, and as the result, it issues a new command, a change to the system. We will not go into commands today, but it's just an idea, an abstraction of the fact that we will be changing the system somehow. And this is a process manager for handling business logic. So process managers are usually the things that handle the business somehow. And let's say you have a problem in your application that you have some logic behind expiring orders, and some people pay for the order, they go to payment, but now your order expires because, for example, you sell tickets and they easily expire, right? But they somehow managed to pay for that order. You have a concurrency problem here, kind of like a distributed transaction problem. And in here, we are saying, if the order was placed and then the order was expired, but then it was paid too late. We want to issue a command which will result in reverting the payment. We want to give back with the payment, right? So in this way, using such event-driven code, you can implement quite a difficult business logic in one place. You can unit test it. You can rely on this. So that's process managers. The next phase that you can use for events is the functional approach. So I have shown you the read model here, where we're actually mutating the state. The functional people, they don't like it for some good reasons sometimes. And instead of building the state in the database, you can just grab all the events from the event store, and you can build all the structure in memory. Every time someone accesses this box of data, you can build it in memory, and it's actually faster than I thought. So that's a good thing. So if you need a very efficient result, then active record is the way to go. But you can also build it in memory. You can just calculate, okay, new event, I will change the data structure, new event, change it, or I will return a new data structure all the time. And you can do the same with process managers. You can do the same with aggregates. So that's the functional approach. And that's how somehow we were never like a big fans of functional, but now we are somehow in this position that we are using some kind of functional code. That's interesting. OK, I told you that there is a third goal with the Rails Event Store. And that's something actually wider than just about Rails Event Store. Rails Event Store is just a gem that we use. We would like if other people use it, but that's not the point of this situation here. I told you at the beginning about DHH. I told you about how hard for him was to sell the idea of Ruby on Rails to the audience when there was no Ruby programmers. He was like a salesman in the hard level. That's like the expert level of sales. So at this conference here, we will have really great talks. Those talks are mostly addressing Ruby people. But try to think in ways that maybe, if you understand certain things about the talk that you find it interesting, maybe you can share it with your non-Ruby friends. Because I think as a community, we sometimes forgot how cool it is to write in Ruby. We have this luxury. Other people, sometimes they don't have it. And if DHH was so successful at convincing non-Ruby people to Ruby by using Rails, some kind of DSL for web applications, then maybe we can do it too. So with Rails Event Store, my third goal is to target the DDD community, the domain-driven design community, which is consisting mostly from Java developers, .NET developers, PHP people, not really that many Ruby people. DDD domain-driven design is not really that popular in Ruby. But somehow with Rails Event Store, we made it so nice that other people from other communities, from other languages, they consider switching to Ruby because they want to use Rails Event Store, for example. And I'm not saying this to tell you how great is Rails Event Store. You can test for yourself. But I want to tell you how it's actually more easy that we can imagine that we can still attract new people to the Ruby community, even those who are already in Java, .NET, or PHP. So that's my message to you, that I think we can do it. And that's all from me. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Andrew, for great presentation. Does anyone have a question?
Thanks for great talk, Andrzej. Could you please tell how do you keep your read models consistent? It looks easy if we have one database, just wrap in the transaction, but what if they use different databases?
So if you go with more databases, you're basically in the distributed world already. So you have the problem of publishing the events and then trying to make it as part of your transaction in the original database, which is a very big problem overall. But I think you can. We have certain patterns that we update read models asynchronously. So not only part of the transaction, but they happen anyway. You need to be careful about the order of events when they come, for example, so that you know that you have processed an event. We have an extension to Rails Event Store, which is called Distributed Rails Event Store, which is exactly handling the problem that you can have read models on different machines. And they will know the position of events which they were processing. So they will actually ask the original event store, give me the events since the last moment I know about events. It's difficult, but we solved most of the problems needed for running this with Postgres, and you can ask the events in the right direction, in the right order, and the right subset. Because in the concurrency situation, you can have people updating the read models, and you can. I know what you mean. You can end up in a situation that your read model didn't handle all the right events. But that's I think in our block Arkency, I think we have some solution for that. And if not, I will ask Robert to describe it better if it wasn't clear.
Thanks.
Any other questions? Yeah, it's me. So my name is Eugene. Thank you for your talk. Actually, a question. The name of your library is Rails Event Store. Do you have any kind of idea of extending this to kind of framework agnostic solution? Or is it already framework agnostic? I'm not really familiar with it. So.
I'm such a marketing genius that I called it Rails Event Store only for marketing reasons. There is just a thin layer in the Rails Event Store. Actually, the main logic of the whole thing is in the Ruby Event Store. It's another gem. So Rails Event Store is just an umbrella project. And the Rails part is very thin. It's just a little bit of magic convenient for Rails people. Generate the migration, for example. And the Ruby Event Store is the base. And you can use it in Hanami. You can use it in whatever else. I'm not sure if, I don't know, what are the other, like Roda or something else. It's easy because there's like no dependency. You only need, like there are many contributors to Rails Event Store, mostly because they need some other ways of storage. For example, there are Mongo people, and they built a Mongo repository for events. And we help them doing that. So overall, that's just a short answer, yes. I'm not sure if we will build like Hanami Event Store, for example, because there will be really not that much code over Ruby Event Store. But maybe for marketing reasons, that would be a great idea. And if marketing works, then this is the most important part.
Thank you. Next question.
Okay, my question is there any possibility to use read models without the Rails Event Store, for example? Is there any pros and cons of this approach? Because I think we can use some kind of views for read models, just database views. And I know there is a library called I think, Scenic. I used this a couple of years ago. So I found the approach that using some kind of read model as a view in the database, and then I can grab all the data through these objects and not use the event store.
Definitely. That's one way. So you can build read models as database views. There are certain pros and cons to that. It's probably a bit more difficult to unit test it from Ruby, for example. But overall, you can build it as a view. And this works. So yeah. So I showed you just one way of doing this. And overall, what I showed you today is nothing specific about Rails Event Store. You can use whatever else is helping you publish events and retrieving events. That's a simple idea.
Okay, next question.
Thank you. Hi. Thank you. It was a great speech. And I have a question about, did you look at DCI pattern?
During the stagnation part, I have looked at DCI, Data Context Interaction. I find it a fantastic architecture. I spent like 1 year or 2 years with that. I even built some applications. I encourage everyone to have a look at DCI. But overall, I consider this a fantastic architecture, but our programming languages are not good enough for that. So even Ruby is a very dynamic programming language, but for DCI, there are certain requirements. The idea of DCI in a nutshell is that you extend your object runtime with certain role, so certain methods, and then you in a way need to unextend that. I found the problem that it's difficult to unextend runtime a specific number of methods from Ruby. You can use some proxy patterns to do that, but I never went this direction that far.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I quite like DDD and used it to some extent, and I think this question is right for you. So at the beginning of the talk, you said that, like in Java, you have a slight over-engineering, but in initial Rails you didn't, and now you're talking about applying DDD in Ruby. So I want to ask, like, don't you have over-engineering applying DDD in Ruby? Is it like Ruby makes it better, or did you just find some like golden middle in engineering with DDD?
All right, that's a very good question. And I'm really careful with not breaking the Rails good things about Rails. So for example, the idea that you can start very quickly with Rails is a fantastic idea because, especially for business people, the idea that you can easily prototype and easily build something is very important. It's like, that's the killer feature of Rails. And if you somehow break this and over-engineer from the beginning, then you will lose that argument. You will lose this great benefit. So this is why the first goal of Rails Event Store was to make it possible to use in existing active record applications or Rails applications, so that you can start quickly without any kind of over-engineering with the typical Railsway approach, which is great for the start. And then at some point, you can start introducing events, and then you can end up with event sourcing at the end with read models and so on. It's a gradual process. I do believe, actually, that in Rails community, we are fantastic. We're probably the best community for building applications from scratch, and we are probably the fastest to get work done. We are very productive. That's fantastic. But I also think that using the early Railsway or the Railsway or even the service objects, I think there is a limit where you can get to with a big application. And like, if you have a 500 models in your Rails application, then typical Railsway, I think, makes some problems.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you, Andrzej. I think It's okay. Last question.
I will be available over the conference, so feel free to come to me later. Oh, by the way, I have stickers. Rails Event Store stickers.
The main part of your presentation, by the way. Okay, you can ask Andrew after his presentation. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you very
I'm
much.
afraid
You mentioned
now.
a couple of times that aggregates are really easy to test. Can you show us an example of a test case?
Of a test for aggregate.
Yep.
Can't really show it, it's on my machine, but I can show you later.
Okay.
But the idea of testing an aggregate is that you call the public methods, which are usually limited number, and then you assert whether it publishes certain events, the events that you would expect, because like read model is accepting events and returning a data structure. Aggregate is receiving receiving the method calls, and it publishes a list of events. So if the list of events matches your expectation, this is a unit test for your aggregate. That's like a input-output testing then. You can also test on a bigger scale. You can test several aggregates working together using commands, for example. But at the end, usually you test whether the events are right. But also you can test whether the read model is right. So you can have like an integration test as well. We try different approaches because sometimes testing the events is like too low level. You don't want to couple to the structure of the event. I get your point. So sometimes we are testing the full like scenarios with the command as the starting point and the read model as the end result. Because read model is actually important because you want to display it in the view. It must be in a certain structure. So that's another way. Okay.
Okay. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you.